India is not fighting this war. India did not start this war. India did not choose this war. And yet your cooking gas is more expensive. Your rupee is at a record low. India's forex reserves have fallen by nearly $38 billion in just 2 months. In Gujarat, ceramics factories have shut down because there is no gas to run the kilns. In Mumbai, restaurants closed in March because there was no cooking gas. Indian bananas are rotting at Kandla port because no shipping company will send refrigerated containers into a war zone. The USA-Iran war, which began on the 28th of February 2026, is thousands of kilometers from India's borders. And yet it is inside every Indian home. How? Why? And what happens next? This is the complete verified story of how the Iran war is hitting India sector by sector, rupee by rupee on AK World Vision. I'm Amrendra Kumar. Welcome to AK World Vision. Today, a story that affects every single Indian, whether they know it or not. Let's get into it. Before we talk about what is happening, you need to understand why India is so vulnerable. It comes down to one geographical fact. The Strait of Hormuz, a narrow waterway between Iran and Oman, just 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, is the passage for 20% of the world's entire oil supply, including 84% of crude oil and 83% of LNG going to Asia. On the 1st of March 2026, Iran effectively closed the strait, allowing only select vessels after negotiation with the IRGC. And India is the world's third largest oil importer. India imports 85 to 90% of its crude oil, 50% of its natural gas, 91% of its LPG, your cooking gas, and 60% of that LPG comes through the Strait of Hormuz. When the strait closes, India's kitchen gas supply is directly threatened. In the financial year ended March 2026, India spent $174.9 billion on crude oil and petroleum products, 22% of its entire import bill. And then the war started, and oil prices jumped 50% from $72 to over $110 per barrel. If oil stays at these prices, India's annual oil import bill could jump by $80 to $90 billion in a single year. That is not a small number. That is an economic shock. Let's start with the most personal impact, the one that hits every Indian family directly. Your cooking gas. LPG prices in India jumped by 60 per cylinder just last week. This is just the beginning. India imports 91% of its LPG. The Gulf through the Strait of Hormuz is the source. With the strait disrupted, supply has tightened dramatically. In March 2026, many restaurants in Mumbai shut down fully or partially because they could not get cooking gas. Not petrol, not diesel, cooking gas. The restaurants that employ lakhs of workers, the dhabas that feed millions of daily workers. In Gujarat, the ceramics industry, which produces tiles and pottery exported worldwide, has shut down because the gas shortage has made running kilns impossible. The Indian government has ordered refineries to stop producing petrochemicals and divert all propane and butane to making cooking gas for households. This is an emergency measure, the kind you take when supply is critically short. India's most vulnerable point in this entire crisis is the cooking gas that heats every Indian home. Now crude oil and fuel. Brent crude oil, which was $72.87 on February 27, the day before the war started, is now hovering between $110 and $120 per barrel, a jump of 50 to 65% in less than 3 months. Here is something important to understand. India's petrol and diesel prices at the pump have not risen. The government has been cutting taxes on fuel to absorb the rising oil cost and keep pump prices stable. But there is a limit to this strategy. Every rupee the government absorbs in tax cuts is a rupee it cannot spend on schools, hospitals, and infrastructure. India's fiscal deficit, the gap between what the government spends and what it earns, is widening. Chief Economic Advisor V. Anantha Nageswaran warned in March. Translation: eventually Indians will have to pay higher prices. India has been rerouting oil tankers away from the Persian Gulf around Africa's Cape of Good Hope. This adds 10 to 15 extra days to each journey plus massive additional fuel and insurance cost. Oil is still arriving, but it is costing far more to get here. And shipping insurance costs for Gulf-bound vessels have skyrocketed, making some routes commercially impossible. The oil crisis has directly triggered India's next major challenge, the rupee. The Indian rupee has crossed 92 per US dollar, a record low. Why does this happen? When India's oil import bill rises, India needs more dollars to pay for it. More demand for dollars means the dollar gets stronger and the rupee gets weaker. A weaker rupee makes everything India imports more expensive, which causes inflation across the economy. Reuters reported in March 2026 that foreign investors were fleeing Indian assets at a record pace due to the oil shock, further weakening the rupee. India's foreign exchange reserves fell from $728.5 billion on February 27 to $690.69 billion by May 1. $37.81 billion gone in just over 2 months. The RBI has been selling its dollar reserves to prop up the rupee, but every dollar the RBI sells reduces the buffer India has for future emergencies. The IMF has projected India's current account deficit, the gap between what India earns and what it spends internationally, at $84 billion for 2026. That is a number that makes economists very uncomfortable. Here is an impact that most people are not talking about but that affects India's 260 million farmers. Fertilizers. India's fertilizer plants run on natural gas LNG. Qatar supplies 50% of India's LNG. With Strait of Hormuz disrupted, LNG supply from Qatar has been severely reduced. Fertilizer plants across India are operating at just 70% of capacity on what officials call Tier 2 priority. Less fertilizer means lower crop yields, which means higher food prices for every Indian. And then India's agricultural exports are hurting too. Basmati rice, India's premium export rice, which earns billions of dollars, sends 70% of its exports to the Middle East and Gulf. The Indian Rice Exporters Federation has advised members to stop all fresh shipments because no insurance company will cover Gulf-bound vessels. Indian bananas exported to the Gulf are rotting at Kandla port because no refrigerated shipping containers will enter the war zone. India's tea industry, which sends 15 to 20% of its production to Iran, has seen payment channels suspended due to new banking sanctions. Tea stocks are piling up in Kolkata and Kochi warehouses, unsold, earning nothing. And on the import side, India gets 23% of its apples and 39% of its almonds from Iran. Both have stopped. Budget fruits, affordable apples that poor families could buy, are disappearing from markets. India's agriculture is being hit from both sides simultaneously. Export markets are shutting, import supply is stopping, fertilizer is running short. The people who will feel this first are India's poorest. There is one more crisis that barely makes the headlines but affects millions of Indian families directly: remittances. India is the world's largest recipient of remittances, money sent home by Indians working abroad. In 2024, India received over $120 billion in remittances. On the 13th of March 2026, Al Jazeera reported that $50 billion in Indian remittances are directly at risk from the Iran war. Here is why. Millions of Indians work in the Gulf, in the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, Oman. They send billions of dollars home every month to families in Kerala, UP, Bihar, Rajasthan, Andhra Pradesh. The Iran war has disrupted Gulf economies significantly. Construction has slowed, tourism has collapsed, business activity has contracted. Gulf employers are beginning to cut costs, which means Indian workers are losing jobs. And new banking sanctions on Iran have disrupted payment channels not just with Iran but with some Gulf adjacent systems too. Think of a family in Kerala whose father is working in Dubai. His employer's business is down, his salary is delayed. The money that pays for school fees, food, medicines back home in India is not arriving. That is not an economic statistic. That is a family in crisis. Let's go sector by sector to understand exactly which parts of India's economy are hurting and how much. Aviation severely hit. Airlines need jet fuel. Jet fuel is made from crude oil. Crude oil is at $110, 120. Indigo, India's largest airline, has seen its stock fall 2.8%, and that is just the beginning. Airlines that had announced international expansion plans are now rethinking. Paints and chemicals severely hit. Paint companies like Asian Paints and Burger get key raw materials from the Gulf. With supply disrupted and cost rising, margins are being squeezed. Ceramics shut down in Gujarat. Already covered but worth repeating, the ceramics industry's shutdown affects thousands of workers. Jewelry and gold hit. We covered Modi's gold appeal jewelry company stocks fell up to 10% on that single announcement. Pharmaceuticals. India imports active pharmaceutical ingredients APIs, some of which come through Gulf supply chains. Disruption is building but not yet critical. IT and software. India's IT sector, which earns in dollars, actually benefits from a weaker rupee because their dollar earnings convert to more rupees. This is one of India's economic buffers. Diamond Surat. Surat is the world's diamond polishing capital. Rough diamonds come from Russia, Africa, and the Gulf. With Gulf supply chains disrupted, some polishing activity has reduced, and some sectors counterintuitively may benefit. Indian oil producers like ONGC and Oil India benefit from higher oil prices. Renewable energy companies, as the crisis makes the case for energy independence even stronger. So what is India doing and what should it be doing? 1. Buying Russian oil. Since the Ukraine war began in 2022, India began buying discounted Russian crude. Russia has become one of India's top oil suppliers, replacing some Middle Eastern dependence. This is now proving to be one of India's smartest hedges. 2. Alternative routes. Oil tankers are being rerouted around Africa's Cape of Good Hope, adding cost and time but keeping supply flowing. 3. Strategic petroleum reserves. India has strategic oil reserves built specifically for emergencies like this. The government has been drawing on these carefully. 4. Tax cuts on fuel, keeping pump prices stable to prevent immediate inflation pain at the cost of fiscal revenue. 5. The Modi appeals, May 11. Work from home, no foreign travel, no gold purchases, public transport and carpooling. Voluntary measures to reduce India's dollar outflow. Accelerate renewable energy. Every solar panel installed in India is oil. India doesn't have to import. India has ambitious renewable targets. The crisis makes their achievement more urgent, not less. Diversify oil suppliers further. USA, Russia, West Africa, Canada, reducing dependence on any single region. Protect the rupee strategically, not by burning all reserves but by smart intervention at critical moments. Protect farmers and the poor. The fertilizer shortage and food price rises will hit India's poor hardest. Targeted subsidies for cooking gas and fertilizers are essential. What happens to India depends almost entirely on how long this war lasts. Best case, a ceasefire or peace deal is reached. The Strait of Hormuz reopens. Oil falls back towards $70, 80. India's forex reserves stabilize. The rupee recovers. LPG prices fall. The damage done is manageable. Recovery begins within months. Best case, the war continues at roughly its current intensity. Oil stays between $100, 120. India's growth rate falls from a projected 6.7% to around 6.2% as UBS has already forecast. The government is eventually forced to raise fuel prices at the pump. Inflation rises. The poor are hit hardest, but India muddles through as it has before. Worst case, the war escalates dramatically. The Strait of Hormuz is fully and completely closed to all traffic. Oil spikes past $130 to $150 per barrel. India faces a genuine balance of payments crisis, its reserves depleted, its currency in free fall. The government is forced into harsh emergency measures, rationing, price controls, severe import restrictions. India survived the 1991 balance of payments crisis when reserves fell to weeks of imports. India survived the 2008 global financial crisis. India survived COVID-19. India is under severe pressure. India is not broken, but the longer this war lasts, the harder the recovery becomes. Let me bring this home to what it means for you. Your cooking gas cylinder already costs 60 more. If the war continues, expect more increases. Your petrol and diesel is stable now. but the government is absorbing an unsustainable cost. Watch for price hikes if oil stays above $100. Your grocery bill is rising and will continue to rise as fertilizer shortages reduce crop yields across India. Your savings, if in gold, have risen in rupee terms because the rupee is weaker. But the purchasing power of those rupees is also falling. Your job security depends on which sector you work in. IT, relatively insulated, aviation, ceramics, chemicals, jewelry, under pressure. None of this is your fault. None of this was India's choice. But understanding what is happening helps you make smarter decisions for your family and your finances. Knowledge is India's best defense against a crisis it did not create. Let me end with the honest verdict. India has genuine strengths that give it resilience. The IT sector earning dollars buffers the rupee. Russian oil discounted reduces Gulf dependence. Strategic petroleum reserves bought time. A large domestic economy where most Indians buy locally limits the damage from global shocks. And a government that, whatever its critics say, has been proactive in responding. But India also has genuine vulnerabilities that this war has exposed brutally. 90% oil import dependence, 91% LPG import dependence, a rupee that weakens fast when dollar demand rises, farmers dependent on imported fertilizer, workers in the Gulf whose jobs are not guaranteed. The USA-Iran war is India's biggest external economic shock since COVID-19. How deep the damage goes depends on how long the war lasts. India did not start this fire, but India, like every time before, will have to find its own way through it. A war thousands of kilometers away is raising your gas bill, weakening your rupee, emptying your market's shelves of affordable apples, and putting Gulf workers' jobs at risk. That is how connected our world is. That is why understanding global events is not optional for any Indian citizen. If this video gave you value, please drop a like. It helps AK World Vision reach more people. Subscribe for more in-depth analysis of news that affects your life. And tell me in the comments, which impact of the Iran war are you feeling most personally in your daily life? Drop your answer below. I read every single comment. I am Amrendra Kumar. This is AK World Vision. See the world differently.